Hello, my name is Kathy Hamlin. I'm originally from Peace River, Alberta. That's about 4 hours north of Edmonton, and I have lived in Edmonton for 50 years. But just to, before we start, I'm gonna pass this photo around of this incredibly beautiful woman. In this photo, she was 32 years old, and we laid her to rest a month ago. This is my mother. And as part of my 60 Scoop presentation, I'll be telling a little bit about her story and our story as a family. So I'm just gonna pass it around. When my mother was 32, she already had 8 of us. So I'm just gonna pass this around. Just so people, as a warm up, right? You're not just sitting here twiddling your thumbs and looking at your phone.
Yeah. Bonjour, Anin, Jason Whitford, Dijnika, Gabi Dedang, Makwadudam. It's an honor and a privilege here to be welcoming you here and moderating this session with our two lovely Cree Equewek. Yeah. I'm a Chief Executive Officer with End Homelessness Winnipeg, an Indigenous organization, holder of a 10-year plan to end homelessness in Winnipeg. We're also the entity holding the Indigenous and the designated stream, and we're doing some work locally there we are doing work that will end homelessness in our city. That was a very powerful message today, and something that I think I personally needed to hear, and I'm sure many of you needed to hear that as well. I just want to acknowledge that we're on the beautiful Mi'kmaq territory, the east coast of Turtle Island. The topic of today's presentation is Indigenous homelessness and truth. I just want to take a couple of minutes just to speak about that before I introduce the two presenters. We have an hour and a half. There's some very powerful messages that came in ceremony and speaking with traditional elders, First Nation elders in my home province. One was from Saging First Nation, the elder, the late Dave Crushane. He's a renowned advocate of identity, land, ceremony, teachings. He left a very powerful impact. And another is my Sundance chief, Elder Wally Swain. They both said the same message. You have to listen to the truth. You have to acknowledge the truth. And you have to learn from the truth and act upon the truth. So I think it's very fitting that we have the presentation on this topic. I'm going to turn it over now to Kim and Kathy, both from Alberta, and they're going to provide you with 30 minutes each of presentations. And then following that, we're going to have 30 minutes of question and answer and conversation about this topic here. Thank you for being here.
I'm computer illiterate, so I'm going to need help. I don't have my grandchildren here with me, so thank you, Kim. Okay, as I said, I'm Kathy Hamlin. I live in Edmonton. I've been living in Edmonton for 50 years. I was born and raised in Peace River. I am a member of the Apprehended Reserve, and that's between Edmonton and Peace River. It means Whitefish Lake. I lived, you know what? I have to do this. I'm sorry. Oh, no, I'm not sorry. I'm not going to apologize for anything. I have to do this. I didn't have time to prepare myself in a good way. Like, I went to my room to go and smudge and to pray and sit and think about my presentation and which is the best way to communicate the story. And I forgot. I didn't forget. I didn't have time. I ended up speaking to my brain-injured husband like on the phone. So I came here and I went, okay, I didn't pray. And then my good sister from Edmonton, Melissa, presented me with this feather. So I know I am for sure not alone. I never am. So I'm going to say a prayer. I never start anything without prayer. And I'll say it in Cree, and I'll translate it as best as I can. Ahai, nianma, wapike heusquil, kinstawi min, kikskimin, giga yusihi. Nimusomnanak nuhumnanak, kiawaw ni help matsu, kanagachestai kanagtamauyak, kiawaw kagihiwihi. Kinaskumpnana anu muuta mantu. Asamin piagogisigaw, matsun ka pizza hamauyak. Kiksiwatsun, kapahui na mauyak. Pugutan si kitamagay sinawak ni nanisika kipatan giyahi. Ahti pugutahto gisigaw, kiksiwatsun ni pizza hamauyak. Tipiakta kamihtamak, ni hop matsun ta pizza hamak. Igatawan giksiyak. Kisiwatsun, wahohtun, iwa sa kisksia humuta ipikagiti hituyak. Kinaskumtinan, nimusumnan pisemuhti, wiwistumi tahto igo kaksiwatsit, putan sisi kipatan giyak tahto gisigaw. Inan kitamaga isinawag. Ahtipugo, nimusumnan, yakamsaskahahkigo, iskuttew. Tipiak kasiwin piagogisigaw. Tahkamihtamak. Ni hokmatsun tapmitsahamak. Kispinui katiwa iskutiwastawigi nisanan. Diskutimnan tahastawiw. Kinaskumtnan uhumnan tipskaupi simuhti. Wia wistigo huksi watsun kasuhi pai pugutan sisi isikipat ngiya kikitamagay sinawag ninan ahtipugo tahto tipskaw kipat tips kiwitap ngoya tipia kasamina piagogiksi piagawaw te piusapahtamah te picagastig piagogisigaw samin temiupmuhtiya. Kinaskumtna nigawi na nuhti, wisti ko huksi watsun kasuhi paig. Pugutan sisi kipat ngiyahki, ahtipugo. Tahto gisigaw nigawi na. Yahkam kagi chihigoyah. Umasigihki may paknamagoyah. Tapichihtayah, tutnamasoyah. Tipiyah, tamiupmatsiyah, kigatawan giskiyah ni hiyauninan. Niana, igatawan giskiyah kahiyaw, iwahuhtuyah. Igatawan giskiyah, tasagi hituyah. Tahtugisigaw tahkamihtamah. Tagagi chihituyah. Euksimaga, kitamagihtawan, kitamagimnan kahiyaw muta. Kapi mamawapiyah, kipi paksimuyah, timipikswatuyah. Kamiutihiyah. Piagi iguas ni pakusimo na no muta. Kahiyaw kawi tataksiniyah niginah paksimuhi. Asamin piagotu tsap maya ahwaw. Nito timnanag. Iwahumagan nanag. Wigimagan nanag. Twasimsnanag. Tusimsnanag. Punto timnanag. Kawisam guya ahwaw ay hay. So to translate that to the best of my ability, I address myself by my Nihawehun, by my Cree name, and I acknowledge the Creator. I acknowledge the Creator and express gratitude that the Creator has blessed us with one more day, with all the love the Creator possesses for each one of us. No matter how many ways we mess up, as human beings, pitiful human beings that we are, Creator continues to portion out all of His love for each one of us. so we can strive to be the best versions of ourselves, that we always remember we are Nihiyawak, we are good people. And we always remember that everything comes from a place of love and to treat each other accordingly. And that we are connected and related, not just to us as human beings, but everything that's on this planet and beyond. And I gave thanks for that love and that connection, that connectedness. And most of all, I give gratitude that we all come here today to come and comfort one another through the hard times. And we all have hard times, and times are getting harder. Us coming here, some of us traveling a long ways. We have sacrificed our time away from home. We are warriors. Because we do that to come and comfort, guide, and help one another. And I also expressed gratitude for our grandfather, son. Grandfather's son's love is as unconditional as our Creator's love for us. No matter how many ways we mess up as human beings, grandfather's son keeps that sacred fire burning so we could keep living every day. If that sacred fire ever goes out, oh boy, our own sacred fires will snuff out. Wouldn't even have time to blink. And I expressed gratitude for our grandmother Moon. Her love is also profoundly unconditional. No matter how many ways we mess up as human beings, Grandmother Moon watches over us during the night. So we might have another opportunity to see another sunrise and be graced with another day of life. And we keep to strive to move in a good way. And I expressed gratitude for Mother Earth, for her profound unconditional love. No matter how many ways we mess up as human beings, our Mother continues to bless us, grace us with all her healing medicine ways, including the sea eagle feather, the water that we drink, the air that we breathe. And I mentioned the sun and fire already, in so many ways. And also the plants that we use. So we could stay on the good red road and always be mindful, connection. So I hit the win, that unconditional love we must express to each other the best that we can. Kagichi hit the win, comforting one another, holding each other up. And I end my prayer with this. We ask only of one thing from the Creator. That at the end of the day, when the sun goes down, whenever your sundown is, that we make it all safely back to our home fires. So we may have another opportunity to sit at the table with our spouses, our children, our grandchildren, our friends and extended family who are couch surfing. My couch isn't empty right now. So I hike in Askumtina. I'm grateful to all of you. So I need to catch my breath for a minute, And people say, oh, Indigenous. What do they call that? Indigenous-led. Indigenous everything. And yet they have all these time limits on us. Time is always ticking away. And let me take a few minutes. And if you all will, take a few minutes for yourselves, take a deep breath. In. That breath of life that fills us with the energy, right? Don't forget that. Everybody just settle their minds down. Thank you. You all look incredible. I don't know if it's just me looking at you, through my eyes of love, or if you're actually looking at me with love in your eyes, because that's what I'm seeing. I've got goosebumps. I'll do that. I get carried away too, so I'll do that presentation. I'm a 60 Scoop survivor. I actually lived with if those of you who are not aware, how many of you are aware of 60 Scoop? Wow! That's a buffalo yell. This is the first time I've been in a room where people, more than half the room, is aware of what the 60 Scoop is. A lot of people who are even in this field of work seem to think that 60 Scoop and residential school are the same thing. They're not. So anyways, I lived with my grandparents till I was 14, every day of my life until I was 14. And then one day I was legally kidnapped by child welfare in my hometown. And the excuse that they gave was my grandparents were not old enough, were not young enough to handle a wayward wild child as myself. Well, they weren't wrong about that. I was wayward and I was wild. But my grandparents were only in their 60s. Like, I'm 66 years old. My grandparents weren't even 66 yet. They were just in their early 60s. And I think about that today and go, yeah, tell me I'm not young enough to look after my grandchildren. I dare you, right? I challenge you. And so I ended up being in foster care for 1.5 years. And I found my way back to my grandparents. Can everybody hear me? Okay. If you can't hear me, just put your hand up or something. So I didn't realize at that time how blessed I was, because I found my way back to my grandparents. They couldn't hold me, because at 14 years old, my foundation as a Cree child had already gelled, and they couldn't crack that foundation. They'd hunt me down, right? Pick me up, put me in detention, youth jail, or put me in group homes. And I finally did. It took me 1.5 years to find my way back to my grandparents. That's how I ended up in Edmonton in 1973, and I was 16. And I went and knocked at my grandparents' door. The first thing they said to me was, "Kiapitche kinihiawan." I said, "Do you still speak Cree?" And I was able to say, "Kiapitche kinihiawan." Oh yeah, I still speak Cree. And I was able to do that because Cree is my first language, and I lived with my grandparents every day for the first 14 years of my life. And while I was away from them, and I was the only brown-faced child for how many communities, I don't know. But I was the only one. I went to a school, to all the schools I went to, from we didn't have kindergarten back then. So it was from grade 1 to grade 12. I was often the only Indigenous child, at least a visible one, right? And I was so afraid I'd lose my language, because I knew if I lost the language, if I forgot the language, I would forget me. I would lose myself, because my grandpa used to say that to us. And I would speak Cree to myself every day. Every day. And I had a foster mother who bought me a copy of Gone with the Wind. That's a great-grandmother of Harlequin romance. And one of my foster mothers, she also bought me a tape recorder. Why, I don't know, but I'm grateful she did, because I would try to translate Gone with the Wind into Cree to myself. And I didn't know how at that time to translate contextually. I translated everything literally. So in the first paragraph on page 38 of Gone with the Wind, Scarlett O'Hara has her first fight with Rhett Butler And there it says, Scarlet heaved her bosom at Rhett Butler. And I thought in my Cree mind, and I translated this literally in Cree, and I went, Tig, why? What those sa may musna? I mean, like, she threw her boobs at him? That doesn't even make sense. I have learned how to translate contextually since. Trust me, I teach Cree now. So the 60s Scoop, if you just change it. So in 1876, Canada mandated that all Indigenous children be forcibly removed into the. I have a real. Every time I say school, I choke. Because we all know those were not schools. Those were Indian residential institutions. And they only had one mind, one set mind, one intention. That was to assimilate us completely, to kill the Indian in every child. For those of you who are quite young, quite new in this field, if you Google that phrase, it shows up in a few of the official government documents, quoted by the officials, okay? This is not stuff we made up. So they eventually figured out that the residential schools were a huge failure. And one of those reasons was that, other than starving and whatever else, right, all the horrendous acts of war crimes inflicted on us. They then, in 1951, the federal government started to close the residential schools down. And in that process, they offloaded their fiduciary responsibility to the provinces. And I'm a co-founder of CISA in Alberta, Sixties Scoop Indigenous Society of Alberta. I'm one of the 7 original co-founders. And I stepped down a few years ago because it was getting to be way too much for me. I couldn't handle any more of the stories. It started to affect me as a survivor too, right? So anyways, from 1951 that's when the 60 Scoop really took off. When we did the research, like with CISA, when we did engagements with other 60 Scoop survivors, in 6 weeks we spoke to over 300 survivors in Alberta alone. And that was when we discovered a lot of the residential institution children were never even sent home. They were pipelined directly into foster care and to adoption agencies. And, so by 1977, there were 15,500 Indigenous children in foster care or who were adopted out. But at that time, they still hadn't counted us non-status children or the Métis children. My mother had 8 of us. And out of 8 of us, 7 of my younger siblings grew up. We're all part of the 60 Scoop and grew up. That's just one family. And think about it, 1960s, 1970s. What is the average size of Indigenous family? 8 to 12 families. 8 children to 12 8 to 12 children per family. And how many of those children were not? So I'm a little iffy about about the stats. I'm not much on numbers, but just to give people the idea, because I know a lot of people, that's how their mind works. So I have to honor that, respect everybody if I'm going to communicate, right? I have to be mindful of how other people's brains work. Me, I'm the kind of person who is truly grateful. I have 20 digits I can always count on. And I mean that literally. So, the 60s Scoop was coined by Patrick Johnston, and he was the one, he noticed the alarming number of foster children that were being apprehended. I can't quite remember his role. I think he was the director of either BC, of Child and Family Services. So he was the one who first coined the term 60 Scoop, 1982, 1983. So, did we miss a slide? Yeah, I did. Okay. No, that's all right. Okay. So, some of the key differences with 60 Scoop, I started to say that the federal government started to recognize that the residential schools were not working too well, other than because of the atrocities they committed on us, but also some of the families, quite a few people actually made it back to their home communities or back to their families. And my grandmother was one of them. My maternal grandmother was one of those people. So once she got home, she embraced everything that they had tried to kill in her, right? So thank God for that. And there were quite a few people. And the other thing that, and the thing with the 60 Scoop, the majority of the 60 Scoop that I have spoken to, including my own siblings, quite a few more, they are not well received back into their communities, back into their own families. That's a harsh reality. And so yesterday I was in one of these sessions, and I heard a woman there speak on her community. She's a 60 Scoop survivor, and her home community embraced her and welcomed her back. And they had a blanket ceremony, a welcoming home ceremony. I cried. I need to hear more stories like that. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen that often. And when we were doing the 60 Scoop engagements, we contacted we contacted all the First Nations communities and Métis settlements in Alberta to bring their 60 Scoop survivors to our sessions. We only had 2 or 3 communities that actually welcomed us and made arrangements for the 60 Scoop survivors to come and speak with us, to come and interact with us. I don't know about the rest of Canada, but in Alberta, it was atrocious. Like, we were just looking at each other, really, like, what, really? And even those who have been returned, who found their way back, we kept hearing the story over and over again. They're still treated as outsiders, even though they've been back home for 20 to 30 years. They never feel completely at home. So to hear that story yesterday was very heartening, very heartwarming. And quite often, they say, well, I don't know where they belong. And the average age group of the 60 Scoop people, right, were between, when we were doing this research, we were at that time like in their 40s, 45 to 72, 73 years old, which is the same age group as the Indian residential institutions. And when they were doing the TRC, they spoke to the people, the survivors. That was also their age group. So the 60 Scoop has created intergenerational houselessness. And I witnessed that. We had an encampment in Edmonton in 2020. And I was I was the on-site grandmother there, and I was there. I was the grandmother, the camp grandmother by default, because I was the only one who would show up every day. They were desperate for a grandmother. So I filled the space, and I loved every minute of it. And the love that I got back from the people was incredible. And every night, we'd sit by the sacred fire we had going 24/7. And there were nights when I would sit with sacred fire all night with the firekeeper. And the people would come. There were so many families that had a grandmother or grandfather, the mom, the mother, and somebody who just aged out. And that person who just aged out, 18, 20 years old, right? Because we couldn't take people under 18 to 20 years old. They'd come and sit by the sacred fire and cry for their babies who are now in foster care. So we all know the catch-22, right? If you're homeless, you don't get to keep your children. And yet, there are no resources for the homes. So these people end up being houseless. Houseless. I don't say homeless, I say houseless. Because we are not homeless. This is our homeland. This is our homeland. So this is our homeland. We're not homeless, we're houseless. Okay? So the children, and then I had a hard time finding really solid statistics and even information, because the information for Sixties Scoop is practically non-existent. And there are national and provincial organizations. Why are they not here? Why are those organizations not here? Okay? And so the top reason for experiencing houselessness is family breakdown. And that family breakdown began with the residential schools. And it just kept perpetuating. To today, now we have millennial scoops. I think it's a crying shame. It's a damning shame that we are okay with the term millennial scoop. When I first heard that in 2017 when we founded CISA, I couldn't believe it. We were like sitting in the legislature having a meeting with Child and Family Services and Indigenous ministry. And I looked at my co-workers, my colleagues, and I went, what? And they went, yeah, like it was perfectly normal. So that just obsessed me. But I am going to say this because I know we're running out of time. A couple more minutes, and again about this time frame. Are you Indigenous or not? Are we going to do this Indigenous way or not? Okay, so briefly, the key differences of the 60s Scoop experience in residential school. Although a lot of people were far removed from their own communities and placed in residential schools, they were still able to see each other and recognize each other. Some of them had family members in the same residential school, even though they couldn't bond, they still saw each other. 60s Scoop children were so far removed, a lot of them didn't even know where they originated. We had survivors from New Zealand, from Germany, from the US, who came and told their stories. And like I said, right, going back home, there were a few fortunate Indian residential institution survivors who did make it back home, or as close to home as they could get. 60 Scoops today are still struggling to fit in, to learn the culture, to learn the language, to everything. They're trying to reestablish themselves. They keep being rejected. And So I'm going to finish with this story. Okay. One of the most heartbreaking stories I heard was this young woman. She was like 46 at the time, maybe 47. She had been adopted out in Germany, to a family in Germany. And she was with them till she was 9, 10 years old. And she said she was the only brown face she saw there her whole life. And then, I don't know, like 10-year-olds, tweens, they start to act up and whatever. Her adoptive family couldn't cope with her. And they sent her back to Canada. And she spent the rest of her years in and out of foster care until she aged out at 18. I was just talk about my own siblings, younger siblings. We don't know each other. They were in and out of foster care their whole lives. At my mother's service last month was the first time all of us got together in one time, at the same time. That was always our mother's dream, and it only happened after she passed. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I want to thank you for presenting. I think it's so hard when you have a time limit, because I know there's so much more that you have to say and offer. And so I wish, you probably could have just did the whole conference. So I feel weird coming up after here to be like,
You're good. You know what you're doing.
So my name is Kim Kikakwe. I am Cree and Soto, thank you. Originally, I'm from Red Pheasant Cree Nation in Saskatchewan on my mom's side. My dad's side is Kiskous First Nation, both in Saskatchewan. I live in Calgary. I've called Calgary home for a long time, but my roots will always be my home and where my family is. So a little bit about me is within the homelessness sector, one thing is our family. We as Indigenous people, we know, you look at the stats again, talking about numbers, is we're always overrepresented in all the things, in homelessness and suicide rates and child welfare systems, and that's very much a common thing. And when I was working in the front line, I guess, within the homelessness sector, I had a program that was for Indigenous youth specifically who are homeless. And as I was trying to work within this urban center, I noticed so many gaps within the systems, and that I was like, there's so many organizations and services that don't know who we are and don't understand our history. And so I just felt like there needs to be a lot more education to really know how to support our people, but to ultimately understand where we come from and why our stats are so high. There's a lot of assumptions and stereotypes that are out there. And it's a matter of dismantling those and having people step up and also dismantle them, that it's not just up to us Indigenous people, but it's everybody in this room that we need you to step up and put those stereotypes and assumptions to a stop, to be able to speak truth ultimately in that. So I want to start off with the definition of Indigenous homelessness. This was written put together by Jesse Thistle and the Aboriginal Standing Committee. And ultimately what that means, what is Indigenous homelessness? It's different than any other group. And what it means, Indigenous homelessness is not about a physical structure. Mm-hmm. It's not just about being houseless. Yes. This is where homelessness first began here in Canada. was with our Indigenous people. What that looks like means it's the loss of land, it's the loss of connection. That was the first thing that happened with our people, was the loss of land. It's the loss of connection that we had from family, from kin, from culture, because of the residential schools. That's what homelessness is for our Indigenous people. It's not just about a house. It's so much deeper than that. And so when working with our people, knowing that it's going to be further about connecting back to the land, one thing, but also the language to family, 60 Scoop survivors, and where is that home and that connection. It's so much more than just being a home. And if you look on the Homeless Hub website, you can really see the breakdown about this definition, and I encourage you to go online and look at it. And they talk about the 12 dimensions of that and breaking it down. So I really encourage you to look at that. So what was life like before colonization? Prior to European contact, we had everything we needed. We were sustaining, we had our own systems, our own way of life. We didn't lack anything, and we didn't need anything. We had our own way of living. You know, up here I have this picture of the circle, and a lot of cultural ways within our Indigenous people are done in circle. And I know Kathy initially had wanted this room to be in a circle. It just didn't happen, but there's a lot of meaning when it comes to circle. And one thing that is there is that everyone's equal when you're in a circle. There's no hierarchy. And before colonization, that's how we lived. We lived in circle. We lived where nobody was above anybody else. We were in true community and having relationship with each other. And looking at this, you see the child, these elders, they're in the middle because it was the whole community. Everybody took care of the children, of the elders, and of the youth. And that's what we need to come back to. And you see the circle where it says family, extended family, and kind of that dotted line, and then this picture beside, because we also, when we looked at family as Indigenous people, there was no, this is my first, second cousin, third cousin, or great aunt. It was, these were my siblings. It was, my cousin is known as my siblings, and that carries through to today. And this was a picture that I had seen roaming through social media somewhere, and I was like, that's exactly it, where it's like my great aunt becomes my grandma, or my second cousin becomes my uncle. And because there's no distinguish between that's my extended family versus family, it's like we're all family. We're all connected in some way. And so that's how we were with life before colonization, and I would say how we still are within our culture. You see a lot of overcrowding in houses, and that's for many layers. One, if it's not affordable housing, it's lack of housing, but it's also in some way intergenerational in how we live, of caring for our elders. And so you'll see many generations living in a home. You'll see many mattresses in a home. And again, multi-layered, but it's true, right? And I grew up always with family living with us. I grew up with cousins at all times. My sisters lived with my other family, and that's just how we were before colonization. The other thing too is we lived off of the land. We had our medicines. We had our own roles of what we call today. We had our seamstresses. We had our doctors. We had our healers. We had our, you name it, whatever current role you would say now. We had our engineers. We had all of that before colonization, which just was a different language. Life after colonization is when our world changed and when homelessness started. And it's really hard when we as Indigenous people are on our own land and don't have that home. And that's what's really hard. After colonization, that was, again, the very first thing that was taken was our land. And then from there came the Indian Act, where when it was mandated with the residential schools, that's where the 60 Scoop came into play. We see things such as the missing and murdered Indigenous women. And again, like Kathy had said, it was the whole intention was to kill the Indian and the child. The whole reason why they had residential schools was to assimilate us. It was genocide. It was to wipe us out of anything that we had lived off prior to colonization. This picture here, you can barely see it actually, but there's a little heart on one of the little boys there, and that's my grandpa. His name is Ernest Sunyas, and this little group of kids are holding a sign that says the pheasants, because these were the kids that were from Red Pheasant Cree Nation, and the ones that were at residential school. So that's my grandpa there, and he had gone for about 10 or 11 years there, and he was a really quiet man. Coming out of that, he refused to speak Cree to his kids because, again, you weren't allowed. You would get punished if you spoke your own language going to residential schools. And so he never spoke Cree to his kids. He would speak Cree fluently to other elders, or if other people who did speak Cree came by, but would never pass it on. Therefore, it wasn't passed on to me. And we see that a lot in our generations of the loss of language. And one thing that is cool is that it's becoming alive again and revived, and it's easier access to connect with language and language holders and knowledge keepers. But after colonization, there was a lot of loss in our communities, in our culture. And oftentimes we think about the loss of everything that happened with the young people and our kids as young as the age of 3 that had gone to residential schools. But when you think about it, imagine the community where the kids were forcibly taken from how life was like before colonization, when it was like the whole community's raising these kids, where kids are then forcibly removed, and now parents, you're in a whole community where there's no kids. And the trauma and the depth of what that would have felt like for just the family, the parents, the grandparents, to be in their community and not have a single kid who have been ripped from their arms, their homes, whatever the traumatic story was, and what they were left with, and still being under the Indian Act. So this is a map here of residential schools that were in Canada, and I would say this is not a full list because there's schools there that are not identified under the government or under churches who still ran like the residential school institutes. And I have family who have gone to the schools but are not recognized and not compensated in any way, and even just the way the government ran the compensation system in all the areas, 60s Scoop, residential school, day schools, is also traumatic and detrimental on its own. But this is a map, again, not fully inclusive, but it's there. So I'm going to give a trigger warning. This is going to be a little clip on residential school, and it's going to be people sharing their stories and their experiences about residential schools and that. So I do want to give trigger warning. They talk about abuse and their experience in there. So please step out if you need to or anything, but just really being mindful of that. So I'm going to play it, and hopefully it works. It should.
Road is very important to a lot of survivors, as when you look out on this road, you always hope to see your parents coming to get you. But it's always a disappointment when they know that's not them. Six years old, I was imprisoned here. I was imprisoned here. I was put here. And I did my time. This is where we slept. This is the dorm room. As children, you get out of bed, and the first thing you do is you make your bed. And we have to make our bed just properly, army style, no wrinkles or nothing, or else we'll get hit. This is the first time I seen the church and the first time I seen a priest standing over there when I was a little boy. I come here lots, Sundays and that, and just the birds here now. I got hit. Like everybody else that spoke the language here. We got beaten. It's hard to come back to a place where you're abused. Like I remember one night laying here, and they never had anything on the windows. They just had them straight open like this. So we always had like moonlight, a little bit light coming in here, and then they'd turn off the lights and it'd get dark. And it'd be dark in here and a little bit of moonlight. And the boys would all be around giggling or trying to go to sleep and tell them to go to bed. But then when just one boy would start off a cry, it'll make us all cry. It was a lonesome cry. And for that reason, that boy would get beaten up.
You know, people often think that residential schools was a long time ago, and the effects of it wasn't. It's something that was like here and now, basically. You know, you hear like get over it or all those things, and that's so wrong because it's here and now, and there could be survivors in this room. You know, we have 60 Scoop survivors in here, and it's now, and so looking at the impacts of why our stats are high is because this is where Canada's been rooted from. And this is where, again, the homelessness began. And so when we're working with our people, we need to understand the trauma that is truly carried through generations. But it's not even long generations because it's literally here and now. They say it was only 1996 when the last residential school closed. And depending on your age, I'm like, where were you in 1996? What did that look like in 1996? Like, that's now and current. And so really recognizing that this wasn't a long time ago and that it is current. This is a list here. I also wanted to include this of the schools in the United States. Very similar stories in there with our Indigenous people. We didn't have borders like we do now as far as Canada and the United States. And so same thing happened, except a little bit of a different system in some ways. But from my understanding, some of the schools are still open. I'm not sure exactly how they're run today, but they're up in over 500 schools now, and they are just now starting to recognize the schools, whereas we are a little bit more ahead in that area. May 2021, that's when, again, shattering news of the remains of 215 children found in Kamloops Indian Residential School. This was a hard time. And there's a scale, I would say, of different experiences in that. There's one thing where our elders, our knowledge keepers, people who are saying, like, we knew all along, we've been trying to say, and that we've known this, but we've never been listened to. It was even in the Truth and Reconciliation, the TRC. It was written in there, and that was written before this even came out. But we were still not heard or still not recognized or honored in any of that way. The other thing, too, I would say at this time, it was also really triggering for our families. And some of us didn't even recognize the triggers when you're in that, and the hardships that brought and the challenges, and leaning into maybe more addictions or substance use because of that, because of the trauma, and being re-triggered of if you're, you know, if you went to these residential schools, maybe you witnessed, I'm sure people had witnessed deaths of just their classmates, their friends, their siblings, their family. And so when these bodies were found in these just babies, that it was very triggering and it was a hard time. The other thing too, I think it was healing for people in our community because it was finally, we could put our babies to rest and we can bring them home and honor their spirits and the life and the families of those who have lost and the experiences in that. And so it was also a time of healing for our people. because of this, September 30th, 2021, then is when the government decided to recognize the National Day of Truth and Reconciliation and make it something, an official day. But my hope is that it's not just a one-day thing, but it's something that it's every day we are trying to take a next step of healing and recognition and empowering and giving back what we can give back and to really come alongside us where we need it. I'm going to show this other little clip here, and this here is a banner of names of children who didn't make it home from residential schools. And what I'm going to say, though, is that this list of names, this was before the Kamloops residential school names were found. So this is an old list. This is nowhere near current. That list would be way longer now. But I just wanted to show it because it was really powerful and impactful for me. It was like, just hit my spirit in a different way when I watched this clip, because it just kind of, it's different when you put a name rather than just a number of 215 when there's a name. And to know that there's so many more names going to be added to this already list of 2,800 that were recognized prior.
We're here to sing your song. Although we may be gone, I feel you here. I feel you here.
You know, it always makes me emotional because it's like our family, you know, and it's hard to advocate and always fight for our people when we're homeless on our own land, and we're always trying to be heard and just to fight for our loved ones and our ancestors, and to constantly be up against roadblocks or racism or stereotypes or just systems that were never meant for us. You know, systemic racism is a very real thing. And so I challenge you to look at your policies, look at your systems within your own organizations, and are they just fully westernized, or do they really include what intergenerational trauma is and what our people have gone through? Because it's different, and the supports need to look different, and your intakes need to look different to really make impactful change. You know, one thing I always want to honor is and highlight is not just the trauma that our people have been through, but the resiliency and the strength that we have. Because that's the only reason why I'm standing here, is because my ancestors, my grandparents, my parents have been resilient, and they've been strong, and they have fought for so much. For me even to be standing here and to say I'm Indigenous and be proud of that, you know. We're resilient. Our people are resilient because they had to be. And our people are resilient because we know how to laugh. You know, sometimes we have like the darkest, messed up humor, but it has gotten us far, and it's funny, and I love it, and I'm so thankful for it because it's brought us a lot of healing. You know, our people have been resilient because they have, in the most detrimental time where our culture and everything within us have tried to be stripped away, that they were still able to hold on to song and language and ceremony and tradition that has become so much more alive and vibrant today. And it could have been lost, but it didn't. And it was because our people have been resilient and have held on to their own spirit in all of that. And they've been so strong in all of that. You know, it's through connection and relationship that's going to make impact when working with our people, when trying to support our people or get to know our people. It's always going to start with relationship. It's not going to start with a checkbox. It's not going to start with an intake. It's not going to start with any of that. It's going to start in building a relationship. And that's where I encourage everybody here is start there. Just be genuine in your intentions and what your purpose is. It's going to be connecting to our culture and ceremony, whatever that may look like for them. Every community is going to have their own way and their own teachings, and not just assuming that you heard one teaching in this area. It could be different in another. And so I encourage you to do your own learning of the area that you're in and whose traditional land that you're on. You know, we have a lot of athletes within our communities connecting to sports. We have the North American Indigenous Games where it's like, you know, a different location across Canada. I encourage you to connect through that. And same with the arts and music and fashion. There's so much talent that's coming up, and I encourage you to support that and make sure you know it's from our Indigenous people, and also going back to them and honoring them for that and not taking what they have worked on and the healing that they've done, because that's all healing. Those are all ways of healing. It's not just going to be through counseling or other ways. It's going to be in attending ceremony or playing sports or getting back into traditional arts or music or fashion, what that looks like. Those are all different ways of healing. So what can you do? I mean, there's many things, but ultimately I would say is always learn about the traditional land that you're on. Wherever you may call home right now, that's also what we call home, but our home is a lot more deep-rooted. This is where we started and what was attempted to take away. So I encourage you, there's so many resources online that you can do your own learnings. And I encourage you to start there before reaching out even to another Indigenous person. Learn as much as you can independently on your own first, and then start reaching out to other people in your community. Again, research, learn what it means to be a true ally and an advocate. Learn about what Indigenous specific supports or people or elders are in your community that you can reach out to when you're at that point. Hire Indigenous staff. That's really crucial. Don't go by credentials of education, because we don't always work that way. There's so much knowledge that we have that is beyond a piece of paper, that's beyond a university class, and kudos to that too. I don't shoot that down. I think that's also important. But when it's when that's one of the requirements, I think that brings a lot of barriers of what our Indigenous people can bring. So I encourage you to hire our people and bring them to the level of leadership. Don't just bring them after the fact or to do a checkbox item, but honestly, that our people need to be on the board, at the table when conversations first start, not when decisions happen and we're like, oh, we need an Indigenous perspective. No, bring us to when conversations are starting, because that's where we need to start and need to be heard and not be an afterthought or just a checkbox item that we need to have an Indigenous perspective after the fact. And then again, review your policies, your procedures, your forms. What does that look like? And consult with the community members of what that truly needs to look like within your community. So I created a 2-day training on Indigenous homelessness, and basically what I just talked about today is a glimpse of that, of what that looks like. And so I just wanted to share the breakdown of what it is, where day one is where we really do a deeper dive into what our community really was like prior to colonization, what the impact was, and then our resiliency. And then day two is where then we can kind of adapt in whatever your needs are as an organization, a community. I build this training from my heart and my passion and my story in that, only because I saw the gaps in the system when I was trying to advocate for the young people in finding housing and to reconnect. I also do this too, even for our own people, because us as Indigenous people, we haven't come from a big history where we openly talked about trauma and intergenerational trauma or residential schools. Like, we didn't talk about that. And there's a lot of education even within our own communities that need to happen in order for us to heal. And I would say, because of my learnings in understanding my own history, that I have been able to heal within myself and my own family and addictions and all the things that I grew up in my home. But it was because I was able to get educated, understand this actually is what intergenerational trauma is, that it wasn't anything I had done as to why I might have been treated a certain way, but it was like, this is what intergenerational trauma looks like. And so it's also important for us as my own brothers and sisters and family in our Indigenous community to also know and understand all of these components, because we don't often talk about it. We just are trying to live and do our thing. I'm going to end on this. And it was just a quote from this book called Clearing the Plains. And this kind of, that book is talking about the history of the plains, so kind of my roots in Treaty 6 where I come from. But it says, now we must face this reality. Reconciliation between Canadians and Indigenous peoples is the most pressing, important, and critical issue of our time. No relationship in Canada is more important, yet no relationship has been more exploited, denied, and ignored. The dire poverty, health, and safety situations and marginalization Indigenous people face in every aspect of Canada's practices and policies cannot be denied any longer. And so I leave that with you today, and just to come alongside us and invite us to the table early on and advocate and open doors where you might have a voice where we don't, and when can we step in on that. And so, yeah, I thank you so much.
Kichimegwich Ekosani, excellent presentation. The truth. That's sometimes we avoid it. I know sometimes I even myself it's sometimes it's too hard to hear, too hard to acknowledge. Sometimes when I see a movie on TV, I intentionally don't want to see it. Yeah, my mother was a residential school survivor. My grandmother, my great-grandmother, my Aunt Lydia was an interpreter for survivors when they filed the compensation, and she heard their stories. And my mom, her older sister by 1 year, she said that absorption of that trauma caused her physical and her mental health and her emotional health to deteriorate, and that sent her to an early grave. Like she absorbed all of that through those stories. But and that's what happened to a lot of our people, and we carry that. We carry that. I have a lot of it brought up a lot of memories, your presentation, and I don't even think I was prepared for that. There was a residential school in my own home community of Sandy Bay Ojibwe Nation, and the design of the residential school was the same across the country. Yeah, the displacement from the land, that's when homelessness first occurred. I'm from Treaty 1 territory in Winnipeg, and Treaty 1 is a new corporation in Winnipeg, and they're pursuing the largest urban reserve in the country on the former Kapyong Barracks, former military base. They call it Nawe-Udina in Winnipeg, and it's on a parcel of land in the center of Winnipeg that's almost like a boardwalk or a Park Avenue tuxedo. And the feds, the city, the province fought the First Nations communities like tooth and nail, but the First Nations won, and the First Nations that'll be the largest urban reserve in Canada. One thing that I would add to your presentation is Indigenous procurement. If you're in a decision making position within your organization and you have the ability to procure goods and services, seek high and low for not only Indigenous staff, Indigenous voices, but goods and services. That's a practice that I've been following for about 20 years as an executive director and a CEO. Was that economic impact it needs to be invested, whether it's tech equipment, whether it's hotels. We have some hotels that are First Nations owned throughout our country. Yeah. Sorry to take up time there, but any questions and comments for our presenters here? And then please go to a microphone because this is being recorded. If we can get our Shkabekwa helper woman to get a portable microphone. And then just please identify who you're asking your question to.
So first off, thank you for sharing your stories. Very powerful. I think most of us in this room will probably have the same sentiment. Like, it's probably the best thing that we see the entire week. It makes the whole trip worthwhile. My question is, maybe for both of you, just are you aware of any efforts or advocacy going on within the government in the educational system to make these topics, these stories, this subject matter, like a standardized curriculum within the school systems?
Is this working? Yeah. I'll answer that first, simply because there's a dire lack of 60 Scoop information out there, never mind any educational supports or say educational information. And I'll tell you why that is, because like Kim mentioned in her presentation, a lot of people to this day view residential schools as a thing of the past, and it's a safer topic to discuss because there are fewer and fewer residential school survivors left. And now there's the 60 Scoop is right now. So I just want to do a quick question here. You don't have to identify yourself, but I just want to know if you feel brave enough or safe enough, not brave enough, safe enough to identify yourself as either residential school survivor or 60 Scoop. Yeah. And so there's a lot of information out there for residential school and the survivors, right? There's not enough. Like I said, there's a dearth of 60 Scoop information. So one of my current missions is to change that. We do have the National 60 Scoop Network. We have the 60 Scoop Healing Foundation. Saskatchewan has a 60 Scoop Indigenous Society. And of course, us in Alberta. We were the first ones. And still, those people are not actively doing much of anything in terms of working together, collaboratively to get that information out there, to petition the governments, to make sure that the 60 Scoop information is as well known as a residential scoop.
I think it also can be different for every province and who the advocates are, especially within the education system or in the academic system of who. And so, I mean, I can't think of one that's kind of overarching and that really stands up other than that we need more. We need it, is what it is. And the challenge in that, though, is the pushback to get there. That's what's hard, is going up against that system to advocate and say this is what needs to be in the education systems and in these institutions for that. And so I feel like I can't just give you a definitive answer. So.
And one more thing on that same topic. One more thing I want to address is that I know in Alberta, we do have Indigenous or residential school education component, but guess who is delivering that? Yeah, it isn't us. It should be us, but it isn't. That needs to change. Thank you.
It's more of a statement to validate all. I want to thank you guys for presenting this and thank you for your words about. There are some things out there that are hard to look at, even till to this day. My name is Jeremy McPeters. I'm from Cold Lake First Nations. I'm Cree Indian. I'm Scottish Irish. It took me a long time to admit that I was part white. I want to thank you guys for allowing me a chance to speak here. I can validate that my parents had met in residential school, and I was born into a reserve that even in 1968, when they said it stopped before, it didn't. They were still guarding people to leave the reserves off in 1968. Whatever you heard, it's not true. It's still 1968. I'm going to tell you why. I was born Christmas Day, and my first gift to this world to my parents was that I was allowed to leave the reserve without being checked. So that was a little blessing for them. My first blessing to them was that I gave them a Christmas gift. You didn't get checked at the gate. Then I was born into this world. I spent a lot of years in really, really hard times in intergenerational trauma from the reserves. The biggest thing is poverty. They keep you poor. And when you're poor, you'll suffer. Pure and simple. Our country is a testament for that. Our country has become a very interesting look at what it's like to live on a reserve. They keep you poor. They keep you broken. They keep you desperate. And then they send you to places like Catholic school. And they teach you racism and difference and indifference, that you are not worthy, that you are not enough, that you are something different other than Indigenous. So to kill the Indian and the child and whatnot was still very, very, very much in play, just in different policies, different capacities. Still a Catholic school, kill the Indian. We were different. They were above us, and we had no soul. I was a heathen before I was actually a human being. So I understand what that had done to me as a kid. It made me grow very, very angry, very, very broken. And back in the 80s, when we had basically, you got beaten, you get beat, you get your FO, your FA, you find out. When you were that broken and I was so desperate for something to do with my life, to have a purpose in my life, other than just being Indigenous and waiting for a hero to come and save me, it was never going to happen. In my height of drugs and drinking at that time, which was marijuana, I was a broken 14-year-old kid they sent off to residential school. Residential school taught me that I wasn't the only fucked up Indian in the whole damn planet. I had family, I had friends, I had people who identified with pain, absolute pain. To come to the residential school was a welcome break from being on the reserve to some degree, because we were allowed a small portion of less abuse and support. Residential school was the most scariest place for me to be when I walked in there on my own in 1988, this January 1st. I was escaping the cold and just the situation I had gotten into in St. Paul. I had walked into the residential school, I pulled the door as we would normally do, and I went into school, only to discover that I remembered that there was no night watchman. I was in the entire property alone in residential school by myself. January 1st. And I can tell you, as I walked through that entire school, I was not alone. I was not alone. I walked to where they had found the bodies where the children were found. So the trauma that was there and the fear that was there, I challenged very early in life to accept that this is something we've got to. How do I overlook this? And how do we help others overlook this? This is our legacy, and we can't let this break us, because at that time I was suicidal. I was very suicidal of the life I was living, where I had to live, the conditions I had to live under. Poverty is his biggest component to adding to our downfall. You give me $20 million, I'd probably still be the same guy, just better suits. Give me $20 million and I gave it away, and I just have a really big ego or a really big heart. You know, what I'm saying in that is it won't change the person of what you're trying to become when you are told no all the time and you're still trying to find a way to be kind. Our biggest ways is that we're only trying to find a way to be kind no matter where we go. And no matter what we do, we siphon little pieces of kindness no matter where we go. Little acts of kindness, people opening a door for you, people being kind. I live by that philosophy. To Edmonton, I'm known as Uncle Jerry, to lots of places, everywhere I go. I'm very, very blessed to know that Kokam Kathy and the work that they're doing, Kakaway here, is very directed, it's very connected emotionally for me to help our people who are on the streets today, who I help the homeless every week. We go on mutual aid, and we go out every week and just help the best way we can. We're giving back with what limited resources we were ever given. And I want to show you something. I want to point something out to you. I give you 3.5 years, 3 years sobriety, just over 3 years sobriety. That was me at the heart of my wonderful uncle stage, discovering who I was, what they took away from me, what they said I couldn't be, what they said I was never ever going to amount to when I was a boy. I hated the day where you had to go up and become something for your class, and I hated the day where you had to announce that you wanted to be a doctor or a lawyer or something positive. They told me to be a garbage collector. That was their goals. They said, that's just right for your kind, your race. That's what they told me. Only to discover that later on in life, after not listening to people telling me no, no, no all the time, I got mad, very angry. And I've never had a life where this man here was hauling water since he can remember. I was born to just to be part of keep the family going. You start working early, you get right, you learn your tradition, you learn the reasons why. You have to live on the land, you haul your water, you chop wood, you help the elders, you listen to your elders, you respect your women, you respect your uncles when they listen to you, because you're going to get smacked. This man here was living the life of his dreams right there, because right there I was being a kid that was taken away from me. I was in party mode, and I didn't want to think. I didn't want to have to be this guy. I was a full-fledged family man before that. I had children, I had vehicles, I had homes, I had everything, lakefront property. I'm one of the how many people that brought the safe injection sites to Canada. I stood out there and I knew 11 of the ladies that personally who ended up on the Robert Picton farm. I would look for them every day. I've done every outreach alleyway before this man showed up. When you add all the trauma that I was holding in from generation, from schools, everything that held me down was crying out right there. And I want to say that I have a joke, and it's not really a joke, it's kind of a truth. I want to thank the Catholic Church for bringing us all Indigenous together, no matter where I go, because I would have never bumped into them in the bush where I lived. So, you know what, all those beautiful souls out there, thank you, you know, this big stirring pot, and they brought us here. I'm very grateful for being able to tell you what it's like to be Indigenous man and to do the job that I do today. I work for our community, and I've been a strong advocate for people. While I was there, I held that camp together on the inside. What brought me out was my connection, my deep connection to my roots, my people that were involved. I was given a blanket by a very dear elder, someone who I absolutely know was connected to authenticity, no BS, none of this lip service. There was a real kokum that I grew up with, one that has the old school respect energy. Someone who has never forgotten what it's like to be a human being and responsible for ourselves, and forget where they came from. And Kokum Kathy here, she gave me this blanket and she said that this is for me because I supported her at a time. I honored her by standing up and taking off my hat and standing in the rain and supporting her and helping our community in Edmonton get right. I was uncle in that group. I held it all together. You know, if you didn't listen to me, yes, you're going to uncle you. But I didn't live by those principles. I didn't have to be violent. I just had to tell you. I just had to make sure you understood. This is what uncles do. We need uncles back in your communities. You need to listen to each other if they tell you this sometimes. If you can't listen to each other, go for a walk and listen to yourself. Those are rules. You got to live in nature. You got to live by the sacred fire, the connections that goes with it. That sacred fire is so important. When I woke up to a drum and a sacred fire, I never drank again. I never had to. And then after discovering 215 bodies in the ground, I never will drink again. I never have to again. That's my pain. That's what broke me. I was always told no because I was Indigenous, because of what killed the Indian. Well, they didn't kill this guy. You know, and in fact, I've got some beautiful children. I've got a beautiful family. I've got a beautiful life. I have tremendous supports from the entire universe, it seems. And each one of you guys who are hearing this voice is going to actually carry on something for yourselves too. That one thing that I take home from here is that we are all equal. We are all on this land, and we were meant to share it, not own it. We have no problem sharing it. We're just trying to make sure that we can get some back. We can give something back to not only these people that are living in encampments like I had to. I'm very familiar with that. And here's how I was good at it. As a young boy, you want to go outside and play and make a fort and hide. Well, that was me hiding. I was preparing for that my whole life. I didn't know that. And I found me in that. So I guess I was taking care of me at a young age and I just wasn't allowed to. Imagine what we could do if we're allowed to help us, if we're allowed to be ourselves, to be unrestricted. I'd love to be Indigenous man today and walk into any place else and be treated with respect just for being there. I'd like to be honored for just who I am and have my daughters do the same with some dignity and respect. That's me helping the homeless. That's me being Uncle Jerry today and just trying to do the best I can. No matter where we go, I got one rule. You be kind, you don't steal, you don't cheat, and if you can't be kind, you keep going. And the last one is, if you find out I'm a Golden Glove boxer once upon a time, I'll hit you. I can live by those rules and enforce my own rules. And I want to say thank you to these ladies that brought this to our attention and gave me a chance to tell you what residential schools have done for you, for me, and I've worked through my pain enough to convey that message to you here, to show you that all Indigenous people, there's many like me in those encampments that are outside right now. Some very intelligent people, and what we're trying to do for ourselves is help ourselves, but we need your help. Wherever you go, I hope something good finds you. And I want to say thank you to you guys. I just bared my soul to everybody. I've never done that before, so thank you very much.
We have time for one question, and then you can stay as long as you want. But some of us might need to use the bathroom or go to another session. So right over here.
I don't actually have a question, more of just a story I'd like to share with you folks. first, like, oh, just such deep gratitude for you folks and being here. And Kathy, I was also at that session yesterday where that woman shared her story of being acknowledged and accepted back into her community. I have lived in the north end of this city for about 10 years. There was a really special person who also lived in this north end long before I did. His name was Willie. I don't know if any folks here are from the city or know of Willie, but Kim, in your presentation, I was reminded of the first time I was educated on the difference between being homeless and houseless through an Indigenous lens. Willie was a houseless person who was in the city, and he had lots of struggles with addiction and mental health. But what Willie did in that area and with folks was just like his spirit was so bright, and he brought positivity no matter where he went. When I first moved into my place on Agricola Street, before I really knew Willie, he'd ask me for a smoke here and there, and I'd apologize for not smoking. And then the joke would be like, "Have you started smoking yet?" and that turned into like Willie and I actually having like engaging conversations. So there was a day, and it was a hot day in the summer, and he made a smoking joke, and I said, "No, but like I have a cold soda. Like, you want to sit down for a second and just have a soda with me?" And I wanted to know more about him, so I asked him directly, like, "How long have you been homeless?" And he was very quick to stand up and say, "I'm not homeless. I'm houseless, but I'm not homeless. This is my home. This is where I belong. This is where I'm from." And it was, a really profound moment for me in my learning and engaging my own ignorances and the way that our education system here has like failed us so deeply. And that was the second moment in my adult life that I can acknowledge where that happened, where I know and knew in that moment what my responsibility was to learn better, do better, and start to share that education too. And Willie developed spinal cancer, I think it was 2 years ago, and that man continued to walk through the north end every single day, in pain, with his walker, with his wheeled mobility devices, and not one day was he not positive, no matter how much pain he was in, no matter how much he was struggling. And when he passed away, it was a really sad thing for our community to lose him, because he just brought joy wherever he went. And I thought about him a lot during your presentation today, so thank you.
I know everybody is probably going to another session. I am going to. But before you all leave, I am asking you to stand up and give a moment of silence of all the residential school institution people who never made it back home, and to all the 60 Scoop people who didn't make it home either, who died on the streets or committed suicide or whatever reason. And quickly on that note of joy, some people are born with that joy. My mother was one of them. Look at that happiness. And she had all of 7 of her babies taken from her, and she still radiated that beauty and that joy. And one more thing, on a good note, my sister over here works for an organization, Liganon Ventures, who have been very successful in reuniting 15 families from Child Family Services. Let's hear. And now, a moment of silence. Hi, hi. Thank you.